Hello everyone. The story I'm going to share today is The Wolf's Gratitude. This story took place in the year of Daoguang during the Qing Dynasty. There were many wolves in the mountainous area of Shan Dong province. The people were not frightened of them, for nothing ever happened. A man named Jia Cai was a highly skilled carpenter. Because he was talented, he received commissions from other villages, so he frequently walked the mountain path. One time, when Jia had passed a cave on his way home, he heard a young wolf wailing. He felt pity for it. He looked around, but did not see any sign of his mother. He thought the mother wolf must have been killed by a hunter. And so this little wolf must be very hungry. Its wail sounded as though it was calling its mother. Jia Cai waited for a while to make sure there were no adult wolves around. Then he picked up the little wolf cub and took it home. When they arrived home, Jia Cai took a knife and cut its tail. He named the little wolf Ruyi and raised it as a dog. 2 years passed, and as Ruyi grew, he became bigger than Dog. When he lost his temper, he looked more ferocious than any dog. However, when Jia Cai or any other his family members scolded Ruyi, he immediately became submissive. But he was not afraid of the local people. Thus, all the villagers were cautious and kept away from it. As time passed, Jia Cai noticed that Ruyi looked at the village children as though he wanted to eat them. Sometimes the wolf quietly followed the children, as if waiting for a chance to attack them. Fortunately, each time he was discovered just in time, so nothing happened. Each time Jia Cai scolded Ruyi loudly. Jia Cai was afraid that Ruyi may one day hurt people, so he told the wolf, "I saved you because your mother died. Otherwise, you would have starved to death years ago. Now you've grown up, but your demonic nature has not changed. It's no longer suitable for you to live here. Today I will return you to the mountains where I found you, to the place where you belong." After Jia Cai talked to Ruyi, his wife cooked the wolf's meal. Jia Cai took the wolf back to the mountain and said, "This is where I found you. Please stay here and do not follow me home." But when Jia Cai turned around and began walking home, Ruyi followed him. When he walked faster, the wolf also quickened his pace. When Jia Cai slowed down, so did the wolf. Finally, Jia Cai stopped, turned around, and said, "Please stop. You cannot come home with me." Ruyi stopped and sadly stared at him. Jia Cai also felt very sad, for he had raised the wolf for such a long time. But he knew he must do it this way. Jia Cai resolutely turned around and walked away without looking back. After he walked about a mile, he looked back and saw Ruyi resting on a huge rock, still sadly watching him. Because Jia Cai often traveled to other villages for work, he usually returned home after sunset. The mountains were full of wolves. One evening, he noticed 3 wolves in the middle of his road. Surprised, Jia Cai immediately stopped. Because he usually traveled alone, he carried a 10 feet long bamboo pole for protection. His heart was jumping as he stood there looking at the wolves. He thought, if it was only one, I could handle it. But since there are 3, I'm not sure I can defend myself. He knew that wolves were very sly. If they attacked him from both front and back, his life might be in danger. He looked around and noticed a cliff nearby. He started to quietly inch towards it. As he slowly moved towards the cliff, 2 more wolves came. Then more came until more than 10 wolves stood in front of him. They nearly surrounded him in a fan shape. Some wolves had already lowered their heads, ready to attack him. He was so frightened. Then he yelled, "Am I destined to die here today?" As soon as he said this, one of the wolves turned its body 180 degrees, as if to show Jia Cai that his tail was different. Although there was a little moonlight, Jia Cai immediately noticed that the wolf had no tail. It was Ruyi. He called out, "Ruyi, save me!" Ruyi began chasing off the other wolves. The other wolves seemed to obey Ruyi, and they quickly left. Jia Cai was still frightened and called out, "Ruyi, bring me home." So Ruyi followed him home. After Jia Cai returned home, he told his wife what happened. He said with deep emotion, "I would have been killed and eaten today if Ruyi had not helped me." Then he took the meal his wife prepared for him and fed it to Ruyi. From then on, Ruyi often waited for him and walked him home. If the villagers encountered wolves and noticed the wolf with no tail, as soon as they called his name, Ruyi would chase the other wolves away. One night, when Jia Cai was nearly asleep, he heard a knock on the door. He asked who it was, but there was no response. He got up and opened the door, and a wolf walked in and lay under the bed. He thought, "Is that Ruyi?" He brought the candle over and saw it was Ruyi. Ruyi was wet with sweat, and on his back was a Baojun bag. When Jia Cai opened it, and he saw it was filled with about 200 taels of silver. Jia Cai wondered where Ruyi got so much silver from. Then he realized that the person who the silver belonged to must have been eaten by wolves. So Ruyi brought it to him to repay his kindness. From then on, Ruyi often brought things, sometimes silver, sometimes other valuable things. Ruyi began coming to the village. Sometimes he stayed in Jia Cai's home. Sometimes he lay in the street. Eventually, the villagers were no longer afraid of it. In their eyes, Ruyi was no longer a fierce wolf, but only a large dog wandering around the village. Years later, when Jia Cai died, the villagers often noticed Ruyi lying in front of his tomb. An ancient Chinese people had a saying about wolf's ambition, meaning that all of the ferocious animals, wolf was the most vicious. Nevertheless, even such a vicious animal could not forget that someone saved his life and would show his gratitude. Those ungrateful people, if they knew that there was such a wolf in the world, would they feel ashamed in their hearts? Thank you very much for listening to the story. More touching stories will be ready for you if you just subscribe it. Thank you again.